Have you ever stood perfectly still and watched your wife look another man straight in the eyes, laughing with a reckless intimacy that made you feel like you were absolutely nothing? Because that is exactly the humiliation that burned through me at a high society party in Newport Beach, standing in a multi-million-dollar house I was currently paying for, surrounded by a crowd of sharks waiting to see if I would finally break. Her hand rested with a proprietary comfort on Logan's arm as she smiled at the vultures around her and said, "I could dump you right now just for a little excitement." Everyone stared at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, fully expecting the weak, cuckolded husband, the predictable and safe man, the quiet, tireless provider who never possesses the spine to fight back. But I did not flinch, and I did not give them the scene they craved. I took a slow, methodical sip of my whiskey, met her betraying eyes with a coldness she didn't recognize, and said, "Go ahead. If you want to know the brutal reality of what happened next, hit follow, drop a comment, and stay with me. This story only gets darker, sharper, and more calculated from here." My name is Grant Maddox. I make a living bringing grand, decaying old buildings back to life with my own two hands and my mind. While other architects chase the hollow prestige of glass towers and shiny, soulless condos, I work on places your grandfather might have walked past with reverence. Brick cracked by the relentless passage of time, wood worn smooth by weather and history, porches that have heard 100 bitter arguments and 1,000 quiet, desperate apologies. Charleston, Savannah. My days are defined by dust, sweat, and the heavy weight of history. It pays exceptionally well. The bills are always covered. The fridge is full. There is a substantial amount of wealth tucked away in the shadows. I never needed the ego-stroking of yachts or private jets. As a man, my list of requirements was simple: a safe, solid home, a woman who was fiercely on my side, and a life that actually meant something beyond the surface. That was it. Security, loyalty, and unwavering respect. I truly didn't think I was asking for much. Men like me don't want to conquer the world. We just want a corner of it that we can protect with our lives. For a long time, I was naive enough to think I had secured that. And then I met Ava Sinclair. I still remember the first night I saw her in a small art gallery in Charleston. Nothing fancy, just exposed brick walls, cheap wine, and the haunting hum of good music. She stood in front of a painting like it was whispering secrets only to her hands moving with a fluid grace as she explained the nuances of color and light to some bored, wealthy couple. Her eyes were alive, not just pretty, but sharp, focused, and hungry for something far more significant than a 9-to-5 grind and a Netflix subscription. We started talking about old houses, peeling paint, creaking floors, and about how some places feel like they remember you. Ava didn't roll her eyes at my sentimentality. She leaned in, asked probing questions, and finished my thoughts before I could speak them. I told myself, this is it. This is the woman I can finally build a life with. The predatory fire in her eyes looked like passion back then, not the hollow ambition it truly was. It looked like a love for beauty, not a desperate love for status and power. Looking back from the wreckage, I know better, but in that moment of weakness, I fell in love with the fire in her eyes. We found a 1920s house in Charleston that every other contractor called a lost cause, a project. I called it home before we even signed the closing papers. The place was exhausted, old floors, a sagging porch, and walls that had seen too much tragedy. I spent months of my life bringing it back from the brink of collapse. Late nights sanding until my hands bled, painting, and fixing structural things no one would ever really notice but me. Ava picked the furniture, the art, and the expensive colors. I picked the load-bearing beams that wouldn't collapse while she slept in peace. The first night we officially moved in, we lay on the hardwood floor eating takeout, surrounded by boxes and the smell of fresh sawdust. She laughed and said, "Can you believe this is finally ours?" And for a while, that single sentence was enough to make every sore muscle and every late hour worth the sacrifice. I started taking on more massive projects, working later into the night, saying yes to lucrative contracts I wasn't excited about just because they paid remarkably well. Ava was rapidly getting used to the finer things, nicer restaurants, weekend trips to the coast, and increasingly expensive designer dresses. I told myself, I'm happy to provide. That's what being a man is, right? Pay the bills, carry the heavy weight, smile, and say it's no big deal. It didn't happen overnight. Betrayal never does. It's a slow-growing rot. At first, it was just new, shiny names dropped into her stories. People from Los Angeles, Newport, guys who had built something big in tech, women who only vacationed in Europe now. The conversations shifted away from us. Less about paintings and old houses, more about square footage, which exclusive rooftop bar was trending, and who sat in VIP with which minor celebrity. She'd come home buzzing with a toxic energy, talking fast, and saying things like, "Grant is so traditional. He doesn't really get the new world, but it's cute." Everyone in her new circle would laugh. I would laugh, too. That's what you do when your wife decides to make you the punchline of her social life. You take it. You tell yourself she's just joking, that she's just having fun. But every single joke left a jagged mark. Tiny cuts, easy to ignore at first, until you start to bleed out. Then one night, sitting at our dining table in the house I had rebuilt with my own sweat, listening to her brag about someone else's hollow life, I realized I felt like a stranger and a servant in my own home. In the one place a man is supposed to feel like he actually matters. It started showing up in her public jokes, little poison lines she'd drop in front of people. Grant would rather stare at old bricks than actually live a little. Everyone laughed at my expense. So I did too. That's what you're trained to do, right? You play along to keep the peace. You become the fun, easygoing, predictable husband who can take a public jab, even when you feel it land like a heavy punch to the ribs. Then came the direct comparisons. Logan just bought a new Tesla on a whim. You're too careful, Grant. Too careful? She said it with a beautiful smile, but every man in that room knew exactly what it meant. Not bold enough. Not exciting enough. Not man enough. Period. I started to notice a chilling pattern. I was the one paying for every dinner, every trip, and every drink, and somehow I was also being framed as the boring, anchor-like weight holding her back from her true potential. I didn't say anything, but somewhere between the old bricks and being too careful, I realized something ugly and terminal. The respect in her eyes was completely gone. And once respect is dead, everything else is just living on borrowed time. The first time I met the man she was replacing me with, she was absolutely glowing. "This is Logan," Ava said, her voice trilling. "He's working on this huge, disruptive new venture in LA. He gave me that practiced, corporate handshake. Firm, polished, and a little too aware of its own performance. His smile was porcelain perfect. His eyes were not. They slid right past me and went straight to the house, calculating the value. Nice place," he said, looking around like a cold appraiser. "You could flip this for a lot more, you know." It wasn't a compliment to my craftsmanship. It was a heartless equation. Ava laughed, her eyes filled with a pride that should have been mine. "Logan understands opportunity. Grant is just more sentimental." Sentimental. That is the derogatory word you use for an old, dying dog and a broken chair you should have thrown out years ago. They shared a private, lingering look after she said it. Not long, not obvious to a casual observer, just long enough for my gut to tighten into a hard knot. In that moment, it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. This guy didn't just want my wife's attention. He wanted my seat at the head of the table, he wanted my view of the world, and he wanted the life I had built brick by brick before his name ever defiled our house. For a long while, I did what a lot of desperate men do. I tried to talk myself out of the crushing reality I already knew. I told myself Ava was just enjoying a new phase of life. New friends, new places, fine. I didn't want to be the stereotypical jealous, controlling husband. I'd look in the mirror and lie to myself, thinking, maybe I'm just insecure. Maybe this is some midlife crisis playing out in my head. I'd sit in our living room, look around at that meticulously restored 1920s house, and desperately remind myself, we built this together. She wouldn't destroy it. She wouldn't blow this all up for a whim. But my gut didn't care about my desperate logic. It twisted into a serpent every time her phone lit up, and she tilted the screen away from my sight. Every late dinner with friends, every vague and shaky explanation, every new inside joke I wasn't part of, it all added a crushing weight. I started checking the clock when she wasn't home. Not obsessively at first, just enough to notice the patterns of her absence. My head kept saying, trust her, but my gut kept screaming, something is very, very wrong. And you can only ignore your gut for so long before it stops whispering and starts roaring. Then came the Savannah trip. 3 days to finalize a massive deal on an old hotel restoration. Good money, a career-defining project. When I told Ava I'd be gone, she didn't sigh or complain about the distance like she used to. She smiled far too easily, a mask of relief. You work too much, she said. But at least I get the house to myself for a bit. I laughed because that's what I've been trained to do as the provider. But that sentence, it stuck in my throat like a shard of glass. At least I get the house to myself. On the drive out of Charleston, something felt fundamentally off, the same way you feel when you're pretty sure you locked the front door, but you can't remember the physical sensation of seeing the deadbolt turn. Savannah was hauntingly beautiful, but I couldn't shake the invasive picture in my mind. Our bed, our kitchen, our sanctuary, all existing without me in it. Not just empty, but occupied by someone else. When I checked into the hotel that night, the room felt less like a place to rest, and more like the cold waiting room for bad news I hadn't been told yet. The deal in Savannah wrapped up much faster than I had anticipated. Most men would have stayed the night, enjoyed the company expense account, and had a quiet evening alone. Not me. I just wanted to go home and see if the house still felt like mine. On the way to the airport, I stopped and bought Ava's favorite flowers. Simple, nothing dramatic. The kind she loved before her life turned into a series of hashtags and rooftop bars. In the cab home, I let myself picture her face when I walked in early. Maybe she'd be surprised, maybe happy, maybe even guilty. But underneath all that pathetic hope, something else pulsed in my chest. A dark, cold feeling I couldn't name yet. Only fear could truly understand it. When I finally got to the door, hand on the cold brass knob, flowers clutched in my arm, my gut whispered the sentence I had been running from for months. Whatever is on the other side of this door, Grant, You are not ready for it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to turn the key. The door wasn't locked. That was the first wrong thing in a house I had personally secured. I stepped inside. No music, no TV, no "hey, babe" from the kitchen. Just a heavy silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for a witness. I called her name once, softly. Nothing. Then I heard it. Her voice, soft, breathless, and unmistakable, coming from the walk-in closet down the hall. I walked quietly, the flowers trembling in my hand like a dying thing. With every step, the house I had built felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were trying to force me to turn around and leave. Then I stopped exactly one step from the doorway, and I heard her laugh. A genuine, deep laugh she hadn't used with me in years. "No, he has no idea," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "He's so predictable." Predictable? The word hit so hard my vision blurred for a second, but it was the next sentence that effectively ended the man I used to be. "I'm telling you, the moment Logan is ready, I'm done here." My hand almost slipped, the flowers nearly hit the floor, and I froze into a statue. She kept talking like my entire life was just a podcast she was recording for her own amusement. "Logan actually sees me," she said, her voice airy. "Grant is just a bank. Just a bank. Not a husband, not a partner, not a man. I was a resource she was ready to withdraw from one last time before closing the account." Then came the sentence that burned itself into my memory with white-hot iron. "You don't leave a bank until you've drained it and found a better one." I didn't breathe. I didn't swallow. I didn't even blink. The flowers in my hand felt like a pathetic joke, a tribute at the funeral of a marriage I hadn't realized was already rotting in the ground. So, I pulled out my phone and I hit record. Her voice was steady, clear, and terrifyingly confident. She wasn't confessing her sins, she was bragging about them. And in that singular moment, something inside me didn't just break. It switched off entirely. I don't even remember the physical act of walking out of that house. I just remember leaving those flowers on the hallway table, like a small, private funeral no one was attending. I drove to a hotel a few miles away and checked in under my own name, even though the clerk didn't ask for ID. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, staring out at a city that suddenly felt like a foreign country. You'd think that's when I'd lose my mind, punch a wall, scream until my lungs gave out, cry, call a friend, and fall apart into a million pieces. Nothing happened. Just a cold, surgical kind of clarity. The woman I had loved wasn't in that house anymore. She had left long before I ever got on that plane to Savannah. All that was left was a stranger wearing her face, managing her final exit strategy. I played the recording again, not to hurt myself, but to ensure I never minimized the betrayal later, to make sure I never gaslight myself into thinking maybe it wasn't that bad. Sitting on that stiff hotel bed, I made a final choice. I am not going to beg for her love. I am not going to scream for my dignity. I am going to rebuild my entire world without her in it. The very next morning, I drove to Atlanta. I didn't tell Ava a thing. I didn't leave a dramatic note. I just got in the truck and went. Howard Keaton, my family's longtime attorney, sat across from me as I pressed play on the recording. Ava's voice filled the mahogany-lined room. "Grant is just a bank. You don't leave a bank until you have another one lined up." Howard didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. When the recording ended, he took off his glasses, polished them slowly, and said, "All right, Grant. What do you want to do?" I didn't talk about the betrayal. I didn't talk about the heartbreak. That emotional part of me was already dead and buried. "I want to protect every single thing I've built," I said, my voice like steel. "And then I want to be completely free of her." He nodded once, his eyes sharp and focused. "Calm, precise, and deadly professional." "Then we do this quietly," he said. "No emotions, just cold, hard facts." And right there in that office, I felt the final shift. This wasn't about pain anymore. It was a demolition project. And I know exactly how to take down a compromised structure the right way. But Howard wasn't done playing. Howard got to work like he'd been waiting for a call, like this his entire career. We went through everything with a fine-toothed comb: business contracts, property deeds, savings, investments. Every line on paper that represented 20 years of early mornings and late, exhausted nights. He reminded me of something I had almost forgotten in my domestic haze. A prenup Ava had signed back when she still thought, "We'll never need this," was a romantic gesture. It was crystal clear. If she cheated, she got very little if I could prove the infidelity. Then came the calculated restructuring. We moved certain assets into trusts with my name completely off the surface. We tightened up my business ownership. We cleaned up and hid anything that could be grabbed in a messy, public split. All while life at home stayed exactly the same for her. Same dinners, same small talk, same fake smiles across the table. She thought she was being so clever, building her private art fund in the shadows. What she didn't know was that every transfer, every skim, every little theft she was so proud of, Howard was meticulously logging. And the prenup she never bothered to read was quietly waiting for its moment to strike. The bank she thought she was robbing was already bricking up its doors from the inside. Howard's advice was simple and brutal. Let her keep moving the money. We document every cent. Let her bury herself. So that is exactly what I did. I watched our joint accounts like a quiet, invisible accountant. Every time Ava shifted a little more into her art fund, I didn't confront her. I didn't block the transaction. I just took a screenshot, sent it to Howard, and filed it away for the coming storm. She truly believed I was blind, that I was the same predictable man on the phone call she'd laughed through. A funny thing happens to your perspective when you stop seeing yourself as the victim. The same actions that used to break your heart start to look like beautiful evidence. Every transfer, every little adjustment she made went from a theft to a legal documentation, from her grand plan to my ultimate leverage. I wasn't the one tied to the chair anymore. I was the one watching her twist the rope around her own neck, click by click, transaction by transaction. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was building the very case that would end the comfortable life she loved. And I didn't have to lift a single finger to help her, except to hit save. While she was busy draining our accounts, I started draining something far more vital, my entire life out of that house. I rented a small, clean apartment under the company name. Nothing fancy, just honest walls and a lock she didn't have a key to. Then I started moving things out. Not the furniture, not the decor. I moved the pieces of me she never even cared to notice. My father's vintage watch, old family photos, and paintings that actually meant something to my soul. One item at a time, slipped into a bag, carried to the truck, and driven to the new sanctuary. Every time I came back, the Charleston house felt less like a home and more like a hollow museum of her inflated ego. Designer mirrors, showpiece chairs, things meant to impress total strangers, not to actually live with. She never once noticed what was missing. Not the empty nail where a cherished family photo had hung for 10 years. That's when the reality hit me. She only ever saw the shiny surface, not the meaningful depth, and certainly not me. So, I kept going, quietly removing anything with a soul until all that remained for her was the empty shell she had chosen over the man who built it. And she never noticed a single thing. At home, I kept the mask on tight. Busy, a little distant, but harmless. Ava would sit at the kitchen counter, an expensive glass of wine in hand, telling me about parties in Newport, dinners in LA, and wild nights with her new crowd. Logan's name slipped in more and more, casually at first, then like he'd always been a part of our lives. I'd answer with the same two hollow words every time. That's nice. She took my lack of reaction as weakness, as permission to go further. The less I reacted, the bolder and more reckless she got. The jokes got sharper, the eye rolls more obvious and insulting. She'd talk over me, correct my speech, and make little comments about how I wouldn't understand this elite world she was in now. It stung. Sure, any man who says it wouldn't is a liar. But every disrespectful word was also a solid brick in the wall I was building between us. It was the proof I'd need later when the part of me that still loved her started to feel weak. Ava looked at me and saw a loser who would never have the guts to leave. She had no idea I'd already found the exit and was halfway out the door in my head. One night, we had dinner with some of my oldest and most loyal clients. People who'd been with me since the early days when I was just a guy with a beat-up truck and a toolbox. It was a massive night for my business. Deals, referrals, and future projects were all on that table. Ava showed up polished, beautiful, and loud. Too much wine, too fast. At first, she was her usual charming self, telling stories and making everyone laugh. Then she turned the spotlight on me like a predator. He's obsessed with work, she said, her smile far too wide. He'd rather stare at dusty blueprints all weekend than take me to Malibu with Logan. The table went deathly quiet. You could feel everyone's eyes move from her to me, weighted with judgment. I gave a thin, practiced smile, took a slow sip of water, and said absolutely nothing. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd already decided this wasn't the battlefield where I'd fight. That night, she didn't just disrespect me as a husband. She undermined me as a man in front of people who trusted me with their legacies. And sitting there in that heavy, suffocating silence, I knew one thing for sure. When I finally moved, it wouldn't be in anger. It would be permanent and devastating. Not long after that disastrous dinner, Ava came to me glowing with excitement. There's going to be a huge party in Newport Beach this summer, she said. Our place, it's going to be massive. She wanted everyone there, her new LA crowd, the Newport elite, and just enough folks from Charleston to make her look legitimate. Her old life and her new life in one room, all staring at her. I said yes to every single request. The high-end caterer, the open bar, the celebrity DJ, the lavish decor, every invoice that hit my email, I approved without a word. If she loved an audience so much, she was going to have a front row seat when the curtain finally dropped. I called Howard and told him the date. We lined it up so all the final paperwork would be executed that morning. The trusts were in place, the accounts were secured, and the divorce was officially filed. All that would be left was for me to say the words out loud. Somewhere in the middle of those frantic party plans, I realized there was no version of my future where she stayed. That night in Newport wasn't just a party anymore. It was the point of no return. The day of the party arrived, and Ava moved through the Newport house like she owned the very ocean. Staff were running around in a panic, lights were being set, and thousands of glasses were lined up in perfect rows. She was in the middle of the chaos, barking orders, fixing tiny details no one would ever notice, acting like the undisputed queen of a kingdom she hadn't paid a single cent for. She wore a silver dress that caught every bit of the dying light. It wasn't just a dress, it was a loud statement. Look at me. Only me. And right beside her, like it was already a decided thing, stood Logan, laughing when she laughed and nodding when she spoke. He looked like a man trying on another man's life to see if it fit his ego. I walked the house slowly. The balcony, the pool area, the living room, the bar. Not to check the party setup, but to feel the edges of the life I was about to step out of forever. I stood by the windows for a moment and let the weight of it hit me. I built all of this. Every paycheck, every massive project, every exhausted night put these walls around her. And tonight, I was going to walk away from all of it and finally be free. Right before the guests started arriving in their luxury cars, Ava floated over to me. She gave me a quick, practiced kiss on the mouth. No warmth, no soul, just contact. Try not to be boring tonight, okay? She said, already half turned away to look for someone more interesting. I looked at her, then at the house I provided, then just nodded. I'll do my best. In the inside pocket of my jacket was a fresh copy of the divorce papers we'd filed that morning. My name, her name, the legal end of what had already died a long time ago. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Howard. All set. That was it. 2 words, no fanfare, no congratulations, just the final confirmation that the exit door was unlocked. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked out to the balcony. The ocean was calm, the lights along the water steady and quiet. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. Not the view, but the feeling of the ending. I wasn't just saying goodbye to a house or a party. I was saying goodbye to the man who tolerated being treated like an option. When the party finally started, it started fast and loud. Music, hollow laughter, and champagne glasses catching the expensive light. People spilled across the deck and around the pool like they'd been waiting their whole lives to be invited to a place this beautiful. Maybe some of them had. Ava posted up near the bar, exactly where everyone could see her. Logan stood glued to her side, his hand on the small of her back like he'd already earned the right to be there. They laughed together like a couple with a long history, not a sordid fling built on secrecy and my stolen money. I kept my distance, leaning against the railing, watching it all like a play I'd already read the script for. A few of my old, loyal friends from Charleston were there, too. You could see the confusion and the half-formed questions on their faces. They noticed the way Ava tilted toward Logan. They noticed the way Logan acted like this was his house and his party. I realized something simple and cold. Tonight wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the final line in the sand. After this, everyone in this room would be forced to decide. They stand in her world, or they stand in mine. From where I stood, I had the perfect, unobstructed view. Logan's hand slid onto the small of Ava's back like it had been there 1,000 times before. She didn't move it, didn't flinch away. She just leaned in closer to his heat. They whispered, heads tilted together, laughing at secrets no one else in the room got. That's the thing about secrets. They make people incredibly careless. At one point, Ava turned to a small, influential circle of guests, champagne in her hand and eyes bright with social victory. She said, "This is Logan. He's someone very important in my future." My future. She said it like I was already a boring story she'd outgrown. A few people glanced over at me, waiting to see if I'd react, if I'd finally mark my territory like a jealous husband. I didn't. I just took another slow sip of my drink and let a small, dark smile curl at the corner of my mouth. They both genuinely believed I was standing on the sidelines, clueless and defeated. But the truth was simple. They weren't looking at their future. They were toasting the very last night of it. Later in the night, I saw the final scene forming. The little circle around her by the pool, the stage she loves most of all. Tipsy, adored, in the center of attention. Ava started in on her favorite, most cruel routine. "Grant is dependable," she said, dragging out the word like an insult. "Too dependable. Boringly dependable." The group laughed. A few of them looked over at me, curious, half expecting me to play my usual role, the harmless, good sport husband who can take a public jab for the sake of the party. Instead, I set my glass down with a definitive click and walked over. I didn't say a word. I just stepped into the circle of light with them and stood there, calm, hands in my pockets, eyes locked on hers. She clocked me, but she was too deep into the performance to stop, too sure of the script where I am always the punchline that never hits back. I could see it in her eyes, the moment she decided to push it even further, to go for the big line, the one she had no idea was about to blow her entire world apart. She took a sip of champagne, laughed a little too loud, and went for the kill. "I could dump you right now just for a little excitement, you know." The whole circle erupted into big, drunk, nervous laughter. The kind people use when they're not sure if something is actually funny or just incredibly mean. A few of them glanced at me, waiting for the usual response, my awkward chuckle, my self-deprecating line to smooth over the tension. I didn't give it to them. I rolled the whiskey in my glass, listening to the ice hit the side. It sounded louder than the music, louder than the splashing pool, louder than her shrill laugh. I looked straight at Ava. Not at Logan, not at the crowd, just her. Go ahead. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just said it like I was agreeing to sign for a routine package. The laughter died instantly in the cold space between us. Her grin froze, then cracked right there in front of her shiny new world. For the first time in a very long time, I watched her realize I wasn't playing along with her games anymore. Grant, don't be so dramatic, she snapped, the color already draining from her face. I tilted my head slightly, observing her like a stranger. You wanted excitement, Ava, I said quietly. Let's give everyone a real show. I turned to the people around us, the friends, the clients, the leeches, and the spectators. Since we're all here, I said, my voice projecting clearly, let me tell you about the reality of my marriage. A nervous chuckle or two rippled through the air. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone else cleared their throat. I kept going, relentless. All those lunches in LA, the weekend getaways in Malibu, the jewelry that somehow didn't show up on any of our joint statements. I watched Logan's face drain of color like someone had pulled a plug in his chest. A few guests stared at him, then at Ava, then back at me. The air around that little circle got incredibly heavy. This is Logan, I said calmly. You've all met him tonight. What you don't know is that I've known about him, and their little arrangement, for months. The party noise faded into background static. They thought they were watching me fall apart. They were actually watching my opening legal statement. I let the silence sit for a second, then I twisted the knife into her ego. You all know Ava loves art, I said. What you don't know is she also loves her secret little art fund. I watched her flinch like she'd been struck. That's the private account, I went on, where she's been quietly moving my money. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. December, January, February. I listed dates and rough amounts. Enough granular detail that the people who understood money went dead silent. Ava's hand started to shake visibly around her glass. Grant, stop this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked straight into her soul. You didn't marry a bank, Ava. You married a man. Her eyes glossed over like she was trying to rewrite reality in real time. And just so we're crystal clear, I added, I didn't hear this from gossip. I have a recording. That cute little call you made in our walk-in closet. The one where you called me just a bank and laughed about not leaving until you had another one lined up. A couple of people actually gasped out loud. For the first time all night, she had absolutely nothing to say. I let that heavy silence sink in before I dropped the last pieces of the puzzle. The divorce papers were filed this morning, I said with terrifying calmness. So when you said you could dump me right now, you were just a little bit too late. Someone literally choked on their drink. I kept going, finishing her. Your things, I told her. The ones you actually paid for yourself, which, surprisingly, isn't much, are already at your mother's place. Everything else stays with the man who actually bought it. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Oh, and the joint accounts, I added as an afterthought. Frozen. Effective as of today. I paused for effect. Credit cards were canceled about an hour ago. So, if you were planning on checking into a luxury hotel tonight, you might have a significant problem. The crowd reacted before she could. Sharp inhales, frantic whispers, and eyes darting between us. Ava looked stripped bare, like someone had just pulled the plug on the life support of her entire image. Then I turned to Logan, who looked like he wanted to vanish. You're taking care of her, right? Since you're the exciting one. He couldn't even look at her. Logan was the first to fold under the pressure. He swallowed hard, glanced at Ava with newfound disgust, then at the crowd. Hey, this is between you two, he muttered, hands up like he'd stumbled into the wrong room. Then he stepped back, one step, then another, until he disappeared into the bodies of the crowd around us. Ava reached for him with her eyes, but he was already gone. Her new circle suddenly discovered their phones, their drinks, and the floor, anything but her. Nobody moved closer. Nobody put a hand on her shaking shoulder. I set my glass down on the nearest table. Enjoy the rest of the evening, I said to the room. Not loud, just perfectly clear. And then I turned and walked straight toward the front door. No dramatic pause, no last look at her, no final parting shot. Behind me, the noise started, her voice rising in a scream, someone trying to calm her down, chairs scraping, and whispers sharpening into blades. But that storm was in a house I no longer lived in. For the first time in years, my back was to the chaos, and I didn't feel the slightest need to fix it. The first week after the Newport party, my phone didn't stop for a second. Text after text from Ava like relentless machine gun fire. I was cruel. I was heartless. I was ungrateful. I had destroyed her reputation, humiliated her in front of her peers, and ruined her perfect life. She didn't once mention the affair. She didn't mention the stolen money, just the fact that I had stopped playing my assigned role. I sat in my new place in Charleston, bare walls, simple furniture, and beautiful quiet, and I read every single message once. Not to torture myself, but to remember exactly who she was. Then I archived them. No reply, not a single word. There was a time when her anger would have sent me driving across town at midnight, ready to apologize for things I didn't even do just to keep the peace. Now, the silence after each notification was the absolute best part of my day. I realized something vital that week. My silence used to mean weakness. Now it meant impenetrable boundaries. I wasn't ignoring her to punish her. I was finally choosing myself over the toxic noise she lived in. After the initial anger cooled, her tone shifted. The messages stopped screaming and started pretending. Can we just talk like adults? Newport got out of hand. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That is what she called months of calculated lies and stolen money. When I didn't answer, she shifted again, desperate. I can change. I'll cut off Logan. We can fix this. She dragged out the highlight reel of our relationship. Our first house, that night on the floor with takeout, the road trips, the inside jokes. She tried to weaponize nostalgia to use my own cherished memories against me. There were moments my thumb hovered over the keyboard. Moments the old version of the husband in me wanted to say, let's talk. But I knew myself too well now. If I opened that door, even a tiny crack, I'd walk right back into a building that was already burned to the ground. So, I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I didn't let good memories blind me to the present, brutal reality. Love had a history, respect didn't. Then came the late-night voicemails. 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone lit up on the nightstand. Her voice was absolutely wrecked. I have nothing without you, she sobbed into the receiver. I can't work. I can't sleep. I can't even breathe. She said Logan had blocked her on everything. They friends who had toasted her in Newport weren't answering her calls anymore. The party was over and the room was empty. For a second, hearing her like that, something in my chest twisted. I'm not made of stone. I did love her once. But here is the difference now. I finally understood the gap between consequence and cruelty. This wasn't something that just happened to her. This was the long overdue bill coming due. I listened all the way through her breakdown. Then I hit delete. No reply, no comfort. No, we'll figure it out. I sat there in the quiet of my new place. No ocean view, no design or anything. Just 4 honest walls and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, her crisis was no longer my responsibility. Ava didn't go away quietly. She hired a shark of a lawyer. He came in with a sharp suit, a sharp smile, and a suitcase full of sharp lies. He painted me as the cold, controlling husband who isolated her, who withheld money, who abandoned his poor, misunderstood wife. I sat there in that deposition and let him talk until he was out of breath. Howard did too. Hands folded, face blank, just waiting for the kill. When it was finally our turn, Howard didn't raise his voice once. He simply slid a thick folder across the table. The prenup, the detailed financial records, the transfer logs to her art fund, the dates, the amounts, all the little thefts she thought were invisible. Then he pulled out his phone and said, Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to play a short recording. The judge nodded, and there it was. Her voice, clear as day, filling the courtroom with her own betrayal. Grant is just a bank. You don't leave a bank until you have another one lined up. Followed by the sound of her laughing at me. I watched the judge's expression change from neutral to disgusted. The entire room shifted. In that moment, it wasn't my word against hers anymore. It was her own words finally standing in judgment next to me. The ruling itself was quick and decisive. The judge went through the legal motions, but the conclusion was simple. The prenup was ironclad and valid. The evidence of her infidelity and financial misconduct was clear. Ava wasn't getting half of everything I had worked for. She was getting exactly what she'd agreed to years ago if she ever did what she just did. A small, insulting amount. Enough to live on. Not enough to keep pretending she'd built any of this. She tried to protest, her voice cracking. Her lawyer tried to push back, but there was nothing left to argue. No money, no case, no story that could survive that recording. By the end, even her own lawyer was done with her. He leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, and walked out of the courtroom first. I left the courthouse holding one thin stack of paper that said I was no longer her husband. Walking down those steps, I realized something. I hadn't lost my wife that day. I'd lost her the night she decided I was just a bank. This was just the day the law finally admitted it. News about Ava's new reality didn't come from me stalking her. It just trickled in through people who still move in both of our worlds. She was back living with her mother in a cramped, small apartment. No ocean view, no designer candles, just thin walls and the shared space of her failure. She'd taken a job at a low-end real estate agency, selling vacation rentals to tourists, walking strangers through other people's dream homes for a meager commission. The car she loved, the designer bags, the luxury shoes, one by one, they all showed up online. Resale sites, lightly used, excellent condition. All those status symbols she once screamed about were now reduced to digital listings with a price tag and a DM for details. She used to glide through town in Uber Black. Now I heard she was taking the bus down streets she once looked at from the back seat of a hired car. And the people who once called her queen, they went silent the moment her lifestyle and my money dried up. I won't lie, there was a small part of me that felt a dark satisfaction, but mostly it just looked like exactly what it was. The absolute cost of her choices finally billed in full. My life, on the other hand, got smaller in all the right, most healthy ways. Most mornings now, I sit on the balcony of my new place in Charleston with a mug of hot coffee, Watching a city I've known for years feel brand new without the suffocating weight of pretending. Inside, the apartment looks exactly like me. Books are stacked where they're actually being read, not just staged for photos. Architectural drawings are rolled out on the table, a testament to my work. A couch that is comfortable first and aesthetic never. No sharp, cold art screaming for attention. No furniture bought just so someone could post it on social media. I still work a lot, probably always will. But it's different now. I'm not grinding to keep up with someone else's manufactured image. I'm restoring buildings because I love the way old brick feels under my hand. The way a saved structure stands tall in a world that tries to tear everything down. At night, the quiet in my home isn't the cold, tense, walking on eggshells silence I used to know. It's soft, honest, and peaceful. For the first time in a very long time, I walk through my own front door and think one simple, powerful word: home. Let me say something to you straight. Man to man, men don't actually want that much from this life. We want a safe, quiet place to sleep, someone who is fiercely on our side through the storm, and a bit of genuine respect when we walk through our own front door. That's it. Not the private jets, not the yachts, not whatever hollow dream Instagram is selling this week. I used to think I wanted to give Ava the whole world. Turns out she didn't want a world that was real. She wanted an exit from reality. For a long time, I let her call me a provider, like it was a compliment, while she treated me like a background character with an unlimited credit card. Not anymore. I'm not a bank. I'm not an ATM. I am a man. And this time, I don't just say that. I live every second like it. I protect what I build. I don't beg to be valued by anyone. And I certainly do not stay in places where my presence is treated like a bill that's long overdue. If any of this hits you in the chest, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Every now and then, someone mentions seeing Ava. A buddy told me he spotted her at a dive bar recently. Cheap wine, a tired, aged face, and talking too loud to anyone who would listen. She was telling her story to strangers. My life was stolen from me. That's her version. In her story, she's the victim of a man who blindsided her, a legal system that punished her, and friends who abandoned her. She still talks like someone came into her perfect world one night and robbed her at gunpoint. But I was there. I know the brutal truth. Her life didn't get stolen, it got traded. She traded loyalty for cheap excitement. She traded respect for temporary attention. And she traded a solid, built life for the hollow promise of something shinier with no foundation under it. I don't feel joy when I hear about her now. I don't feel pity, either. I feel an immense distance, like I'm listening to a stranger's sad story. Because in the end, nothing was stolen. It was all forfeited by her own hand. When I look back now, it feels like a straight, inevitable line. From that night in Newport to the bouquet of flowers dying alone on the hallway table, to the hotel room, the courtroom, and finally this quiet apartment that actually feels like mine. Here is what I've learned. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is walk away in absolute silence. Not slamming doors, not sending long, emotional texts, and certainly not begging someone to see your worth. You cannot force anyone to respect you. You cannot argue someone into loving you, right? But you can absolutely stop staying in places where you're treated like you're lucky just to be allowed in the room. I rebuilt my entire life from the ground up. This time, I built it for me. If this story hits something deep in your chest, maybe it's time to ask yourself a hard, uncomfortable question. What are you still building on a rotten, compromised foundation? And how much longer are you going to keep calling that ruin your home? If you found out your partner viewed you as nothing more than a bank account to be drained, would you have the strength to walk away in silence? Or would you burn everything down on your way out? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments.